Manifesto of the Free Humans. Part 3. Creating Conscious Agoras. The goal of this final part of the Manifesto of the Free Humans pertains to both of our specific preferences for a conscious agora existing in a stateless society. It is important to remember that we do not believe in a one-size-fits-all model and are not attempting to state that every free conscious agora should organize in the fashion described in the following pages. Obviously, our subjective preferences are contained in these chapters, but we see our ideal intentional community as existing among the myriad of diverse, unique communities that will exist in a truly freed marketplace of ideas. We encourage the reader to take our words and review them and compare to your own values and principles. Do our ideas measure up to your vision? If not, please take what you can learn from our efforts and adapt it to your community's specific needs. We believe in freedom, and thus we believe in diversity. Our vision of an intentional community will be one among the many coexisting communities, microstates, communes, neighborhoods, and other yet-to-be-discovered ways of self-organizing. The actual formation of such a community is slated to begin in early 2020. We will spend the next 4 years building towards this goal via the Freedom Cell movement. While the political system continues to disappoint the masses, Freedom Cells and agorism offer a bright future. The next 3 chapters explain the points of unity for this coming intentional community: sovereignty of the individual, permagora, and mindfulness. The triangle on the following pages represents the culmination of these 3 principles. When combined with a counter-economic strategy, these principles lead to the realization of the conscious agora. Chapter 11. Sovereignty of the individual. When imagining our ideal community, there are several considerations to make. As we have discussed, there is a vast spectrum of opinions regarding property, the environment, immigration, and the organizational structure society will take. No matter the agenda item, our first question is always, does the action impede upon another free person's right to live free from coercion and violence? Those in favor of animal equality could also expand the question to ask, do my actions prevent any life from living free of coercion and violence? Whichever principle you start with, the goal is the reduction of violence and oppression in our everyday lives. This is a foundational principle for the establishment of a conscious agora. As mentioned earlier, this principle is known as the sovereignty of the individual and was first expounded by Josiah Warren in the 1840s. In his book, Partisans of Freedom, A Study in American Anarchism, William O. Reichart describes Warren as the, quote, chief architect of libertarianism. Despite his best efforts, many modern anarchists are oblivious to his powerful body of work. Warren wholeheartedly believed that any action taken to limit the rights of the individual was immoral and would lead to strife. In his manifesto, he writes, quote, the forming of societies or any other artificial combinations is the first, greatest, and most fatal mistake ever committed by legislators and by reformers. That all these combinations require the surrender of the natural sovereignty of the individual over her or his person, time, property, and responsibilities to the government of the combination. That this tends to prostrate the individual, to reduce him to a mere piece of a machine, involving others in responsibility for his acts, and being involved in responsibilities for the acts and sentiments of his associates. He lives and acts without proper control over his own affairs, without certainty as to the results of his actions, and almost without brains that he dares to use of his own account, and consequently never realizes the great objects for which society is professedly formed. Warren came to these conclusions after his experiences with Robert Owen, a British social reform activist who had launched a utopian community in Scotland before coming to America to launch another community in New Harmony, Indiana. Warren was living in Cincinnati, Ohio, until he decided to move his whole family to New Harmony to join Owen's community. The decision would greatly affect his philosophical path. Warren would later note that New Harmony failed due to the decision to put communal interests above that of each individual. With his newfound appreciation for individuality, Warren left New Harmony in 1827 and headed back to Cincinnati to further develop his theories. In 1847, Warren established a community known as Utopia, just 30 miles from Cincinnati. Finally, in 1850, Warren went to New York and established Modern Times on Long Island. The community was successful for several years under the direction of Josiah Warren and his theories. Eventually, Modern Times would evolve into the city known as Brentwood. The town was described as a thriving community with a printing plant, a carriage factory, and a furniture factory. A place where every house had a garden, every person was free to live as they pleased, and there were no police, courts, jails, or even a single recorded crime. Residents reported that conflicts were handled by isolating or refusing to do business with those who chose to violate the sovereignty of other individuals. All of this was made possible because Josiah Warren founded the community on the basic understanding that every individual's right to self-ownership would be respected. Quote, "The great principle of human elevation was perceived to be the sovereignty of the individual over his or her person and time and property and responsibilities," Warren wrote. He also believed that only through a process called disconnection could an individual untangle their connections to other human beings and truly respect the sovereignty of the individual. Warren extended his individualist vision to economics, stating that a version of the labor theory of value, or what he called equitable commerce, ensured that unequal exchanges did not take place. In this way, Warren can be seen as the earliest proponent of mutualist economics. Although we favor the subjective theory of value, we appreciate Josiah Warren's development of concepts like time banking and labor hours, which he arrived at through his equitable commerce theory. Ultimately, we completely accept the sovereignty of every individual to organize their economic transactions how they please, regardless of our own personal preferences. It is Warren's sovereignty of the individual that will guide the intentional community that we plan to establish. This will require purchasing land and, unfortunately, paying property taxes. Of course, agorists should always strive to opt out of taxation. However, in the current political climate, it seems inevitable that free humans will be best served with a piece of land with which to build for the future and propagate the message of freedom. By purchasing the land before the state collapses or is defeated, we hope to be proactive in our efforts to build the counter-economy and the coming agora. It has become increasingly difficult to sit by and live among mainstream society, all the while contributing to unsustainable systems that do not serve to harmonize relationships between the inhabitants of this planet. The hope is that we are able to gain a foothold on a piece of land and continue to propagate the agorist message until the state becomes weak enough and the agora strong enough that our community decides we are no longer under threat to pay property taxes, a strategy we will explore in detail later in this section. The freedom of land also allows a freedom cell to grow their own food, cultivate independence via counter-economic activity, and maintain a level of privacy from governments and their loyalists. A freedom cell could use the land to build community centers for hosting meetups, counter-economic markets, radical musical festivals, skill shares, and cell building. Within this free agora, each member of the freedom cell will be free to make a living as they please, provided they respect individual sovereignty, using any currency they choose, grow what food they want, and build whatever home they choose. Obviously, a community can decide to only permit vegans, for example, or only allow sustainable methods of buildings to be used, but each individual entering into the community will be made fully aware of any contractual obligations that may exist. Our main goal is to establish that every single person choosing to live within the walls of our community is free to do as they please, provided they are not harming anyone else. The intentional community that will begin in 2020 only has two other stipulations for potential community members, both of which make up the remaining corners of our triangle. Sovereignty of the individual, mindfulness, permagora, with counter-economics and the agorist philosophy, create the conscious agora.